Hi everyone, welcome to the third session in our series on the historical context of the book of Daniel. This series is meant to serve as a supplement to our digitally Daniel Bible study. Today we're going to move from the Babylonian period into the Persian period. But before we do that, I wanted to quickly review as we transition from the Babylonian Empire into the Persian Empire. So the exiled Jews were taken away from their homes in Jerusalem and settled as communities within the Babylonian Empire. And if we recall, we have Jehoiakim, who went into exile. He was the first king of Judah to go into exile. He was the last kind of pseudo-independent king of Judah. But when his father revolted against Nebuchadnezzar, his father was killed by assassins, and Jehoiachin only reigned for about 3 months before he was overtaken by Nebuchadnezzar's army, and then he was taken into exile with his sons. And this was the first of the exiles into Babylon. And so then his uncle Zedekiah was set up as the king of the region to reign on behalf of Nebuchadnezzar until he also revolted and decided he was not going to pay his tributes. And so then Nebuchadnezzar himself came and sieged Jerusalem, and this resulted in the total destruction of Jerusalem and even more Judahites being led into captivity. But after Nebuchadnezzar died, things started to get a little bit better for the Jews. And there's actually evidence of this in the Bible. In 2 Kings chapter 25, we can read starting in verse 27. In the 37th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month, King Evil Merodach of Babylon, in the year that he began to reign, released King Jehoiachin of Judah from prison. He spoke kindly to him and gave him a seat above the other seats of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiachin put aside his prison clothes. Every day of his life he dined regularly in the king's presence. For his allowance, a regular allowance was given him by the king, a portion every day as long as he lived. So this king that they're referring to in the Bible, he is called Evil Merodach. This is actually King Abel Marduk, who was the son-in-law of Nebuchadnezzar, who reigned very briefly after his father-in-law. And so there is evidence of this in the Bible itself. We've also got some evidence of this period of Jehoiachin's exile in Ezekiel. Ezekiel himself was part of the first wave of exiles who went to Babylon. The historical statement at the beginning of Ezekiel puts him in Babylon in the 5th year of Jehoiachin's exile, when Jehoiachin was still in jail. And after 37 years, he was finally released after Nebuchadnezzar died. So after Nebuchadnezzar, there was a fairly quick succession of various kings. The one who lasted the longest was called King Nabonidus, and he reigned from 556 to 539 BCE. But 3 years into his reign, he left Babylon to live at an oasis in Arabia, leaving his son Belshazzar, not to be confused with Belteshazzar, which is the name that Daniel was given, but Belshazzar is the son of Nabonidus, who ruled on behalf of his father as a prince while his father was away. Now, Belshazzar was a very incompetent leader. He did not do a very good job. The handwriting on the wall incident in Daniel 5 shows that his empire would be divided between the Medes and the Persians, and that is the case. Belshazzar and his father Nabonidus were in Babylon in 539, when legend has it the invading Persians diverted the Euphrates River so that they could gain entrance to Babylon, because the walls on 3 sides could not be penetrated, but they diverted the river, which made the 4th wall, and were able to sneak in the dry bed of the river. So that's how they were conquered. So the Persians actually rose out of another empire called the Medes. The Medes inhabited the western and northern regions of what is present day Iran, and they held the largest empire in the world up to that point. So you can see on the map here, the lighter kind of orangey color is the holdings of the Medes at this time. The darker red color down toward the Persian Gulf is the Persian Empire at the time. And then the pink part is the Babylonian Empire, and then the purple part is the extent of the Persian Empire at its height, which we don't reach for a little while. So right now we're talking about the Medes being that lighter orange color, and the Persians are the red color. So the Medes were the dominant force and dominated the Persians until Cyrus united the empires in 559 BCE. And there are several kings of the Medes who are important at this time. Here down in the corner you can see a relief of one of those kings, King Cyaxares. However, the Persians were soon to get involved, and that was in part thanks to King Cyrus I of the Persians, his son Cambyses. They were the predecessors of Cyrus the Great, who is a really, really important figure for our study of Daniel. Cambyses married the daughter of the Median king at the time, and this union resulted in the birth of Cyrus II, or Cyrus the Great. And with the birth of Cyrus II, we move officially into the period of the Persian Empire proper. Cyrus II united the Medes and the Persians in terms of blood, but then he also was able to unite them politically. So Cyrus ruled from 559 to 529 BCE, and he, like I said, was half Persian, half Mede. He, in 550 BCE, defeated the Medes and united the two separate Iranian kingdoms. And in 539 BCE, Babylon surrendered, so he expanded the empire and took over Babylon. Eventually, Cyrus conquered most of Southwest Asia, much of Central Asia, and much of the region bordering the Indian Empire before he died. Now, Cyrus II was really important and really different because he had a very different understanding of how to deal with exiled peoples. So when he took over the Babylonian Empire, he was hailed as a liberator by the Jews and by other peoples because he had a very tolerant policy and he allowed all of the exiled people to return to their homes. And this was a major change in terms of how things worked. Previous to this, before him, almost all conquerors moved the conquered peoples to different parts of their empires to avoid rebellion. And so here you can see the cylinder, the Edict of Cyrus on a cylinder, which reflects religious tolerance that he espoused. Cyrus actually allowed the Jews to return to Judea and rebuild their temple. And this is really interesting for us because there are places in the Bible where Cyrus is referred to in the Hebrew as Mashiach, which translates into English as Messiah, which of course has a lot of meaning for us as Christians. So Cyrus eventually died in 530 BCE. He died in a battle. And so here you can see his tomb and you can see some of his conquests. So he took the Persian Empire from that tiny little light tan color there by the Gulf. He took over the Medes, he took over the Babylonians, and he even moved his way into Greece a little bit. And then that more purpley part is some of the conquests of his descendants. So the son of Cyrus II was named Cambyses II. He was named after his grandfather. And so here is a picture, a relief of him. And then there is another relief that shows him worshiping one of the gods of the Persians. And he spread the Persian Empire even deeper into Egypt, but he didn't rule for very long. He only ruled for about 5 years because he committed suicide in 522 BCE. So he was followed then by King Darius the First, or also called Darius the Mede. His reign was marked by lots of revolts. Babylon revolted twice. Elam revolted 3 times. Ionia revolted once. And Darius subdued all of these revolts by sending loyal generals to punish the dissenters. So he was, through this tight reign, able to unite his crumbling empire. So he divided the empire into 20 provinces under the supervision of 20 satraps. And he created a code of law which was similar to the Code of Hammurabi, which was one of the earliest codes of law that we have. And he appointed Persians to sit with native leaders as judges, so that there was the voice of the Persians, but also the locals were given some level of control over their courts. And he started a system of taxation. Darius, for whatever reason, wanted to win the loyalty of the Jews, and so he was more tolerant of the Jews than his predecessors, which is interesting in terms of history because he is the one who appears in the book of Daniel as the one who ends up throwing Daniel into the lion's den because of the decisions that he makes in terms of worship of him. So then Darius also built the city of Persepolis and made it the new capital of the empire. So here you can see an artist's rendering of what Persepolis may have looked like. So Darius was able to keep the large, sprawling empire relatively under control, although he had a lot of revolts to deal with. And then eventually Darius died in the year 486 BCE, and he was followed by Xerxes the First. And Xerxes faced a lot of the same problems his father did. There was constant revolt, but the empire began to crumble under his leadership because he levied a lot of new taxes. He suppressed revolts in Egypt and Babylonia. He burned Athens, which lost him any support he might have claimed from Greece, his neighbor. He destroyed Babylon's temples. He would not allow the Jews to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And in 465 BCE, he was killed in a palace revolt. And Xerxes, interestingly, is in control during in the book of Esther. So he is called Ahasuerus instead of Xerxes, but in that book, it is believed that is the king that is being referred to. So the book of Esther also has a connection here. So after Xerxes the First died, his son Artaxerxes took over, and the empire was very weakened. He tried to keep it together by engaging in many battles with neighboring empires. He accepted a peace treaty with Greece that ended the Persian War. And he also relaxed some of his father's positions on the Jews. He allowed them to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. In fact, he viewed the Jews favorably and even funded Ezra's mission to return to Jerusalem and to reconvert the Jews who were living there. And he reinforced Cyrus's edict, which allowed many more Jews to return to Judea. So I just wanted to show you a few images of some of the kind of culture of the Persian Empire. Here we have some reliefs. We've got a relief depicting travelers paying homage to Darius there at the top. And then there's another relief on a staircase, and then the ruins of the Gate of Xerxes. And here we have the ruins of Persepolis, the capital of the Persian Empire, there at the bottom, along with a couple of brick walls portraying Persian bodyguards, and then a picture of the main god of the Persians. The Persians prided themselves on their beautiful palaces and tombs. They cut reliefs into rocks to celebrate their victories in battle, and they liked to also make art that reflected life in the court. So the Persian language is interesting. The Persian language is a branch of the Indo-Iranian language group, so it's similar to Latin and Greek, but the alphabet is very different. It was written in cuneiform, which used wedge-shaped figures that you can kind of see there in the one image, and so there are similarities in terms of the spoken language between Latin and Greek, but you wouldn't be able to read it unless you learned the completely different alphabet. And in terms of the religion of the Persians, the wise lord, the main god, is called Ahura Mazda, and he is the chief god. But they also believed in an eternal evil spirit called Angramenu, and they were monotheistic. So the wise lord is the only god, but the evil spirit is eternal. I think similar in some ways to how we understand the devil today. And there's certainly some comparison to be made between Agramenu and our understanding of the devil. The Zoroastrians, which was the name for the religion of the Persians, taught ethical demands. They believed in angels and demons. They believed in resurrection and judgment after death. They believed in heaven and hell. They believed that the king received a divine mandate to rule from the chief god, Ahura Mazda, or Mazdu, sorry. And there was a lot of apocalyptic imagery in their religion. So you can see that there are a lot of commonalities between the moving the forward movement of Judaism and then into Christianity and Zoroastrianism. So there's definitely a lot of influence there. So kind of comparing that a little bit to Judaism in the Persian period, Judaism developed very strict monotheism. They, of course, were monotheists before that, but even more so in the Persian period. They emphasized the law more heavily. The office of the scribe developed, and the formation of the synagogue as the center of Jewish life developed in the absence of the temple. Of course, the office of the monarch and the prophet completely disappeared. There's no more king in the line of David. And instead, the emphasis moved over to the high priesthood. So the high priest received a lot of the religious authority. In this period, also, the Sanhedrin developed. The Sanhedrin was a group of judges that acted as the legislative body in each Jewish town. And the Great Sanhedrin, the highest legislative body in Judaism, met in the temple after it was rebuilt in Jerusalem. At the same time, the Samaritan schisms took place. When the exiled Jews returned to Judah, they considered the Jews of the northern kingdom to be foreigners and no longer Jews because they had been conquered and exiled in 721 BCE, whereas the Jews of the southern kingdom weren't exiled until 587 BCE, and so they felt that they had been too enculturated, too diluted by their interaction with the Assyrian Empire and others who had conquered them and been in that area for a couple hundred years. And so they saw the Samaritans as half-breeds. They refused to accept their help in rebuilding the temple. And so eventually the Samaritans left and ended up building their own temple north of Jerusalem. Also during this period, there were several new theological developments or further developments of ideas. Belief in the resurrection and the afterlife, a complex system of angels and demons, and the idea of messianic expectations, the idea that the Messiah, the anointed one, would be coming. And so here we've got depictions. These are from the Renaissance period, but they are depictions of Cyrus the Great allowing the Jews to return and to rebuild Jerusalem there on the left. And then on the right, we've got an image of Esther before King Xerxes. And so in the book of Daniel, we see a lot of this history being played out and being mentioned. Chapters 5 through 12 of Daniel have the setting during the rule of the Medes and the Persians. Chapters 5, 7, and 8 are set during the quote-unquote reign of Belshazzar. He is called King Belshazzar in the book of Daniel, although he was only ever actually Prince Belshazzar, given that his father, King Nabonidus, was still around and just allowing him to rule in his stead. In chapter 5, we have the writing on the wall, prophesying that Belshazzar would lose his kingdom. And in chapter 7 and 8, the author sets the visions as occurring during the first and third years of King Belshazzar's reigns. And then chapters 6 and 9 are set during the reign of Darius the Mede. In chapter 6, Darius is tricked by some of his advisors into making a law to forbid prayer because they know that such a law is the only way that they will be able to entrap Daniel. And so Daniel ends up getting thrown into the lion's den. And then in the visions of chapter 9 are set in the first year of the reign of Darius, who took over rule of Babylon, possibly as a way to show that oppressive empires will come to an end. So they're reminding us of the previous existence of Babylon, but now Darius is in charge. And then chapters 10 through 12 are set during the reign of Cyrus the Persian in terms of the claimed setting of the Bible, of the narratives. There are no narrative accounts in Daniel which feature Cyrus, though, which is interesting because Cyrus for Daniel is really one of the most important figures. The coming of Cyrus represents the end of the exile in Daniel. And then if we remember in chapter 1, it shows that Daniel survived through the time of the exile and into the Persian period in Babylon. And so he makes it to the end of the exilic period. But the continued theme throughout all of these later chapters and visions make it clear that oppressive regimes will only last for a period of time. Sometimes that period is long, sometimes it's short, but God's kingdom will ultimately prevail and last eternally. So that's what we've got for the Persian period. I hope that was helpful for you to get a little bit of a sense of what was going on during this time and some of the names and places that are important. And I look forward to seeing you in class on Thursdays. Thanks very much.